So happy 4th of July, my American subscribers. And of course I know I'm going to get some people who are going to be ribbing me saying, oh, you're British, you know, we beat you and everything. But I just want to point out to people before they get butthurt about some of the stuff in this video that I'm half Irish, and the reasons you don't like the English are probably the same reasons my family and stuff didn't like the English, so it's not really an own for me. In terms of this video, I just wanted to get in a couple things. It's going to be a bit rambly. And of course, I'm going to talk about various things going on in America on, you know, its birthday. But let's kick this all off by reading a bit of the Declaration of Independence. And of course, I'm not naive enough to think that the Declaration of Independence is this amazing, you know, document in terms of, you know, advocating for equality for everybody in the world, everybody in America at the time when it was founded. I'm not naive enough to think that, but inherently the message in it is really good. And especially if you take a modern context and look at it again, it's, you know, really great wording and, you know, advocates for great things in terms of looking back at it in a modern way. And of course, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States is the foundation for human rights, essentially, because the UN adopted similar language when talking about, you know, the human rights they're going to advocate for everyone on the planet. So I'm sure most of you know it pretty well if you're an American, but let's just get into it and read a tiny bit of it. So, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and institute a new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organising its powers in such form. So from that part I read to you about everyone's rights, you know, the pursuit of happiness, the rights to, you know, equality and liberty, doesn't it seem pretty ironic on, you know, America's birthday that it's just been revealed at how badly migrants are being treated in concentration camps? Some of these pictures, which hopefully I'll put on screen, are so devastating. You know, really put yourself in that situation. There's one I want to put on that is just this room, like a really crowded room with loads of people all trying to sleep. Can you imagine if that was you? And can you imagine if you were not allowed to leave and you didn't know, you know, when you'd get released or when the conditions would get better? And Americans' Declaration of Independence is fighting for things like liberty. And like I said, would the founding fathers really care about people like this? Would they really care about, you know, non-white people? You know, it's really hard to believe that they would. And that's something, you know, that's pretty lost on a lot of this rhetoric around America, is that, you know, white slave owners, most of them were slave owners, capitalist people, who were really fighting a revolution to benefit them more than the average Joe. Because did the average Joe get a vote after the war was ended? Did every veteran get to vote? You know, they didn't. Same in Britain, you know, the same sort of electoral system where it wasn't just based, you know, one man, one vote. It took various reforms to get to that point. So I don't believe that the founding fathers would particularly care about the migrants in detention camps. And a lot of, you know, the founding fathers would go on to be presidents while the US expanded its territory. So these people are often mythicized to be a lot more, you know, modern and forward thinking than they were. You know, no doubt there is a lot of interesting things around them. George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, some of their beliefs about religion are very interesting. Some of their beliefs about, you know, just mankind were pretty interesting. George Washington, for example, put in his will to free all his slaves when he died. Thomas Jefferson edited the miracles out of the Bible. Can you imagine, you know, a US president doing that today? Editing the miracles out of the Bible? Pretty crazy to think, you know, someone who founded the country couldn't get away with that today. But it kind of just shows how backward America's gone. And going back to the concentration camps point, America is founded by immigrants. It is made up of mostly immigrants. A lot of these communities have assimilated. You know, it's so diverse and it's this melting pot. And when US foreign policy creates situations in Central America and South America that are really untenable for these people, and they come to America looking for a new life, looking for a better life, just like people, you know, who are from the same background as me, Irish people, did in America, just as, you know, a lot of Hispanic people have done the last century, a lot of Italians, pretty much everyone has done this, Jews, Germans, everyone like that. And the fact that, you know, you're now treating these people like they've done some sort of criminal act, and you're locking them up in such, you know, inhumane conditions while the world just watches on. You know, I studied a lot of American history in university. I'd say I'm an expert on American politics and history in terms of, you know, it's what I know the most about, it's what I'm educated most in. I don't think there's an example in the last maybe 70 years which is as, you know, disgusting as these concentration camps, because of course in the past you have the reservations, you have slavery, you have, you know, treating Hispanics like this. You know, the Eisenhower administration did pretty similar things, and, you know, maybe a tiny bit worse as well in some instances. But at the same time, it's probably one of the worst things, and it sort of reminds me about how monstrous a lot of the population of America are. And not because they're monsters, because I think, we all agree the scary things about the Nazis a lot of the time is that loads of normal people just joined into this monstrous group. But there's some notable, examples I think of, people voting for Nixon en masse during the Vietnam War when it came to like everything he'd done. The majority of Americans in America at the time supporting the killing of those students at Kent State. Can you imagine that today? The National Guard shoot dead 3 students, people, a bit younger than me, 18, 19, 20, and most of the country supports that. And I think it goes to show how, the right wing in America have always been horrible. And, you can see it today where people are just supporting this stuff and dehumanising these people. When AOC goes into the camps and tells you what they're like, there's a massive pushback against that. Why is that the case? And let me put a hypothetical scenario out for you right now. And I think this will scare a lot of people. Let's say tomorrow Trump says everyone in these concentration camps, or maybe all adults, let's start with that, all adults in these concentration camps will be put to death because we must stop these people coming here. We must have a deterrent. We must stop them. It's the only way, folks. I didn't want to do this, but we have to do this. If Trump set out that policy tomorrow, how many people in the GOP, how many Trump supporters do you think would go along with that? Honestly ask yourselves, after everything he's done, how much worse everything has got under him in terms of these inhumane policies and, this racism he's unleashed on the country, or a better description is help this underground racism really come to the forefront. Do you honestly think there wouldn't be millions of people supporting this policy? Come on, there would, because there's been such dehumanisation of these groups, migrants and other groups like Muslims. People would support that. GOP politicians would support it. They'd say stuff like, if they didn't want this to happen, they shouldn't come here, essentially. And this would happen. Let's be honest with yourself. Even if you're conservative and this thought that I'm saying right now is horrible to you, you really don't agree with it, you personally, even though you might support the camps, you could never support something like that. There's people that would, and there's a lot of people that would as well. Not saying the majority, I'm saying a lot of people would, and it's a horrible thought, and that's how things escalate. I guess people wouldn't be surprised, at the start of his presidency if you could go back in time and tell them what would happen. But at the same time, I think a lot of people are a bit naive thinking he wouldn't be this bad, and he obviously is this bad. And on the 4th of July 2019, you're one step closer to fascism. You have a significant amount of the country supporting concentration camp. There's no point mincing words talking about, the definition of concentration camp, because historically it's proven this is what they are. And people are dying in them. And if you think, if these turn into death camps and people wouldn't support them, you're pretty naive. America is the country that inspired Nazi Germany. And I know people don't like hearing that, but Hitler was sort of inspired by the nonchalance the Americans committed genocide essentially against the natives. He thought it was something to be emulated in Eastern Europe against the Slavs. Because, the Americans just went about it pretty systematically in the end. And they've always acted like they're the good guys, they've done it for good reasons. But there's a lot of fascism in Americans' history. Then you have things like eugenics in California and many states where they would, sterilise people who were deaf, who were blind, because they thought they could pass that on to people pretty easily. And obviously you have, like I'm saying, the race laws, Jim Crow, and then before that slavery, and then today you still have awful stuff to do with race. And, you have to kid yourself a bit that America has lived up to the wording in the Declaration of Independence. And like I said, the history of America is founded, by these white slave-owning capitalists. In essence, America is one of the only countries, because it's so modern, to be found as a slave state and a racist state. Because, countries like Britain were founded a lot, sooner, and they were founded at a time when there wasn't much diversity, so there aren't specific laws against people of colour. Not saying there isn't institutional racism in the UK, there is, but what I'm saying is, for example, when the black GIs came over to Britain in 1943 and 1944, they weren't treated in a racist way because there wasn't any racist laws against them, and the Americans couldn't believe this. And it just shows how backward America has been and how, it hasn't lived up to this language in the Declaration of Independence. And it isn't what, the best country on earth. I think it's the most dangerous country on earth. It's a country that, commits the most atrocities. It's a country that commits the most awful things at the current time. And it goes around using this American exceptionist bullshit to convince its civilians it's somehow better than everyone else. Think about this stuff with Iran right now. That's all in America. They're provoking them, they're doing all these things, ripping up a nuclear deal which they agreed to, and having bases on all sides of Iran, and they're saying Iran are the bad guys because they reject the American hegemony, they reject American capitalism, and they reject the US system, essentially. Americans like to bang on about the British Empire and how you fought and defeated the British Empire. You took over from the British Empire after the Second World War. You have done things that the British Empire were never capable of. Think about the war in Vietnam, essentially committing genocide against peasant farmers and women and children. And you still paint that today as a noble cause, the right wing in America. One of the worst wars of all time, the worst war since World War II. Devastating war, chemical weapons use, people still suffering today, loads of American soldiers forced to fight and die in a war for capitalism. And you think that you're the greatest country on earth for doing that. And not only doing that, you go and do it again in Iraq and cause so much devastation to the Middle East. And you think you're the best country in the world. And think about all the Americans who support these things. The majority supported Vietnam. The majority supported the Iraq war. The majority supported Afghanistan for most of its time there. The majority would probably support the Iran war as well, to start with, because they'd rally around the president. And this is a bit of a rant, so every 4th of July you talk about freedom. Are Americans free if you have Nazi mobs with AR-15s going round? Are Americans free if 30,000 people die from not having health insurance and most, a massive chunk of people can't afford it? Are Americans free if you're working in the service industry and you have to make a lot of your money from tips? Are Americans free while billionaires get a massive tax break but you can't even afford your rent? All these things, capitalism is a problem throughout the world, but America in the West is the easiest example you can point to and be like, this system is so broken. And it's crazy that so many Americans have been brainwashed to believe it's the best system. And the pushback against things like universal healthcare in particular are pretty crazy to me, because like, America's different and Europe, we can't have this, it's a bigger population. Why can Cuba have universal healthcare? A really poor country which the US puts under embargo. Why can that have it and the US can't? Why can the UK in 1948 have it after it's been destroyed by World War II and the US can't? And it's because the elite in America and the capitalist class have, been so effective at brainwashing people, through Fox News, through the Republican propaganda. All these things they make you go along with. And I'm just arguing with Trump supporters online about these concentration camps. They all say the same stuff because they're brainwashed by things like Fox News and conservative media. They all trot out the same things, and it's not always their fault, because there's an effort in America, especially in the right wing, to make people as uneducated as possible so they swallow up this propaganda. And it's just complete insanity. And I would say North Korea would like to study Fox News and American conservatives to see how people willingly brainwash themselves, because North Korea have to use all these drastic measures, all these camps, prison camps and death camps, all these security things in North Korea to make people believe in what they're saying. Half of America just believe it because they're so stupid and ignorant and bigoted. They just swallow up this propaganda they're fed. And I can't even believe Americans think they're the greatest country on earth. You talk about shithole countries. What other countries in Western Europe have camps like that? Or in the civilized world, what other countries have camps like that? There isn't anything really comparable, is there? We have things like the migrant jungle sort of slum in Calais with people waiting to try and get into the UK. That's obviously bad, isn't it? It's not the same as institutional, essentially, cruelty and racism to people who are non-white. Separating children and you might not ever see them again. And the thing about the Facebook group of the Border Patrol agents and all these neo-Nazis in the police force, your country is seriously fucked up. All these white supremacist terror attacks. And no country is perfect. I'm from the UK. Think of all the stuff we're having with Brexit, the Brexit party. Our country is messed up at the moment as well. But it is nothing compared to your country, because we have problems and we see them. And I think a lot of people want to address them. In America, half the country won't even see it as a problem. You won't see innocent children and women dying in prison camps. You don't see that as a problem. You think it's a good thing. You support a president who does that. You support a racist, fascist president who doesn't, uses the Attorney General, so his aides and all his officials who have been asked to come to Congress to answer questions. He's not doing that. He's not using the rule of law. He's cozying up to dictators. He wants to give Saudi Arabia the bomb. And you think you're the greatest country on earth. You think you're a free country. You think you're a good country. That is total bullshit. And like I'm saying, most countries aren't that great. Things like the UK, for example, I'm talking about, and the history of the UK as an Irish person as well, what they've done to the country where I'm from for about 500 years, what they've done to multiple countries in the world, India, the places in the Middle East, it's messed up. But the thing is now, hopefully a lot of us are recognising this. I know a lot of people in Britain still think the British Empire was a good thing. But in America, you are the British Empire, and you look down upon the British Empire as that sort of this imperialist institution. but you're acting like them, and maybe even worse, because you have the benefit of this education, of this history, and because you think you're not occupying every single country that you basically own, it's not the same thing. You know, a country steps out of line, North Korea, Iran, Russia, Syria, Libya, and you destroy their economy, and then a lot of times you destroy their country with an invasion, and you think you're not the fascist, and you think you're not the imperialist. And let me just say this to wrap up. There are loads of good people in America, loads of people like me, loads of my subscribers are American, and they're all super nice, and they realise the system is broken. And what is happening, it's such an entrenched system, it's so hard to fight back at, especially when you have so many people brainwashed by the capitalist class and the elite, and it's so hard. Even centrists, for example, Jake Tapper talking about this Antifa stuff, taking the side of some journalist who says that most racially motivated attacks are hoaxes. That's the centrist for you, saying that if you fight fascism with violence, you're a fascist, because that makes sense, doesn't it? Did World War II not happen? Did the Spanish Civil War not happen? And it's just crazy. These centrists enable these people, and these centrists aren't necessarily bad people, but they haven't woken up to the nature of what their country is and what it's always been. And on this 4th of July, I read out that Declaration of Independence. How does that apply to America now? You think you would know by now, after all these years of history, you should try and be more like that, but you're not. You're totally opposite from the wording. And like I said, the people who wrote that didn't mean it in the way we think today. They meant it, the independence and freedom for white people, for white Christians essentially as well. They didn't mean it in the way we think today, but with our modern morals, hopefully we take the language and use it for something good. That's why it is the basis for human rights. But again, we talk about, Trump likes to talk about shithole countries in Africa. America is a shithole country. UN says Alabama is one of the worst places in the developed world for poverty. And you think your country's the best in the world. It's crazy. So anyway, again, happy 4th of July, all my American friends. Hope you enjoy it. And hopefully, I guess you use it as a chance to reflect on how far your country has gone wrong and what the problems that have always been in your country. Like I said, I'm passionate about things like America because I know there's a lot of good people in America and I feel really bad for them. And I love American history and I love American culture. And it just depresses me reading the news every day, seeing this stuff. I can't believe what I'm reading, essentially. I'm watching concentration camps happening, and I'm seeing, what people must have seen in Germany when the Nazis were getting all the support. I'm seeing people supporting this. You've seen those pictures. How can you think that's okay in any capacity as a human when you see stuff like that? Just put yourself in that position. Put yourself in the position of having to flee violence and poverty in these countries that have been made worse by decades of US imperialism. And are you not a human being if you think this is, you've dehumanized these people so much in your mind, you have no sympathy for them. And like I said, it is, you think, how could Nazism happen? How could Nazi Germany happen? This is how it happens. You dehumanize a group so much, and you're so brainwashed, and you're so hateful. You might not necessarily be a bad person. You might not go around, hitting immigrants all the time, but your beliefs are enabling this type of fascism. And history is not going to be kind. Just how history is not kind to the right wing in the Vietnam War, it's not kind to the people who were pro-war. It never is. It's the Iraq War as well. It's never kind. And in 20 years' time, 30 years' time, people are going to look back at this time and be like, how could people go along with that? And there's going to be tons of people who are still around. If you're my age now, saying 30, you're 50, you're going to have kids. And you're probably going to act like you never supported it. It was so awful. But at the same time, you're the people who enable this stuff. So anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments. It was a bit of a rant. It wasn't really planned. It wasn't really structured. I just had to get it out because, I've been reading all this stuff in the news. I just had to say something. If you like the video, please leave a like, maybe subscribe to the channel. If you want to follow me on social media, follow me at The Cavernacle on both Twitter and Instagram. I also have a WordPress blog. That's just The Cavernacle WordPress. I also have a Patreon now, so that is just in the description. I'm trying to get funding for a new camera, maybe a green screen. Maybe check that out if you're feeling generous or just want to have a look at what's on there. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.